Okay, this Saturday night we are facing the San Jose Earthquakes, usually guaranteed to be one of the spiciest matches of our season. On Tuesday, the Swoontower boys talked with Mark Followill for a preview from an Apple TV announcer perspective, but sometimes the national media view of a team is more general than what we could learn from an inside perspective. So we reached out to the Quakes play-by-play announcer and host of the Soccer Hour podcast, Ted Ramey. Ted, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me. Very excited to talk with y'all. Appreciate it.
Pre-show, we talked a lot about Taylor Swift. We talked a lot about the stuff that we're both into. I think this is going to be really fun. But I do want to just get into it here for our listeners. So to go off the kind of general premise of the show, right? National MLS coverage definitely reduces complexities to generalities sometimes. And so we want to know, how does the national take on San Jose compare to local perspectives, right? In the season preview, MLS Soccer was talking about how your goalkeeper needed to kind of stay top of the league for Quake success, right? And that it seems like there might be a little bit of hesitance or like slow adoption of Lucci's structures. In general, that feels pretty accurate. What about specifically around the team? What is kind of the take right now on San Jose?
I think right now it's a situation where the team has had some very tough results. Like they were in Dallas in the opener and it was tied 1-1, like in the waning moments at the death, as they like to say. And Dallas found the go-ahead goal. And that was like, a bit of a gut punch. And then in the second game, it was the LA Galaxy who came in, with a head full of steam, and they had looked good in their previous outings, and they took it to San Jose. And I think those first two games were kind of a, what's the Mike Tyson quote? Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the jaw or punched in the face or something. And I think that kind of wobbled things a little bit. And the Earthquakes lost the following week to Vancouver and then went into Kansas City, took a 1-0 lead, and then again was able to not hold on and surrendered a 2-1 loss. Came back against Seattle, got a 3-2 win, which probably is not indicative of how much the Earthquakes dominated that game. Seattle was awarded a soft penalty, in my opinion, letter of the law, but not always going to be called. So that made it probably a closer game than it should have been. And then last week against Houston, the Earthquakes jump out to a 1-0 lead 58 seconds in, and then they got a red card in the 35th minute, I believe, and then another one that came in stoppage time after they'd surrendered a couple goals, and they lost again. So, there was a lot of predictions about the Earthquakes this year of them not being great and being not in a playoff position like they were a year ago. And unfortunately, those predictions have been correct. But I always say, it looks worse from the outside or from a distance than when you are up close, because I think when you're up close, you see that this team has been there. They've taken the lead first in 4 out of the 6 games, which, if you score first in Major League Soccer, that's usually going to put you in a good position. And they have taken leads on the road, in particular, in all 3 of their road matches, at Houston, at Sporting Kansas City, and at Dallas up to this point. So that, in and of itself, that's a good sign. It's the inability to hold on to those leads, which kind of goes down to the overall inability to score, which has been a problem going back to really the post-Leagues Cup timeline of a year ago. The Earthquakes their offense hasn't been humming. There's been a lot in the offseason about the need for a center attacking midfielder, a DP center attacking mid, which is that central playmaker who's really going to advance things offensively when they get into the attacking third. Jamiro Montero was in that role for the last 2 years, but he wasn't really a natural offensive playmaker that way. He would win the ball back in the middle of the field, and he had a great work rate, but he wasn't contributing enough offensively. And they looked for that player in the offseason, and they weren't able to get it done for whatever reasons there may be. That's, those things are above my pay grade, I like to say. But they do have an 18-year-old in Nico Chakiris, who was phenomenal against Seattle 2 games ago and really showed a lot of the hype of why he's been with the U.S. U20s, was in the World Cup for the U20s last year. Really just has a high level of talent about him. And he was also in Houston, and then he got subbed out after the red card because they needed more defensive replacements. So, it's a long way of saying, the Earthquakes from the national perspective have lived up to their expectations, but they've been a lot closer than I think maybe the 3 points after 6 games would really indicate. And I think there is the sense that if they can get over the hump and get the ball rolling, they can rectify things pretty quickly. But as we know in Major League Soccer, if you get off to a slow start, it's hard to come back from. But it is a long season. You know, there's 34 games, and it usually comes down to decision day for a lot of teams to see where they're going to end up. And I think the Earthquakes are trying to have the viewpoint of they're still trying to change their roster, get things going offensively in particular, and then see what they can do from that point. Because I think, last week it's a perfect example, up 1-0 on the road, and they're coming off a win already, and things are going great until they get a red card and go a man down. If you go a man down, even with a 1-0 lead on the road, it's probably not going to end well. So
especially
right now,
in Houston.
Yeah. But even so, they held on a long time.
They did. It was like watching from my perspective, it was like, because I work in hockey as well, I was like, this has like been a 65-minute penalty kill where it's just clear the zone, clear the zone, clear the zone. And listen, we can talk tactics of what they should have done, but I think that's, when you're a man down, it takes a toll. And I think just trying to get it out of the zone was the best strategy, and tough to hold on, like you said, in Houston. Thankfully, it was, late March as opposed to August when it's when it's just wet outside, for lack of a better term.
A swamp. You play in a swamp.
Like, I've earned the nickname Sweaty Teddy over my life, but like in Houston, I was like, this is my time. So.
Oh, man. Well, you kind of led a little bit into our next question, which is looking at their current form. It's not super exciting. 4 losses and a win in the last 5 matches. Mm-hmm. But as you mentioned, that doesn't really tell the whole story. What have you seen in previous seasons about the Quakes' ability to come back from a couple tough losses? Obviously you were hoping to carry the momentum of the win forward, which it felt like they were doing in Houston. But from there, how do they come back from this emotionally, mentally as a team?
I think they have the guys who can do it. I think they all have a lot of very strong-willed people in the locker room. I think William Yarborough, who's filling in for the injured keeper, Daniel, who is a great MLS keeper in his own right and a former United States men's national team player. If you have a chance to check out the media availability that he did yesterday, just such a very strong presence, very calm, very much understanding of what it takes to get it done. But you have guys like him and Christian Espinosa, who's our right winger, who is as dangerous a winger as there is in Major League Soccer. 13 goals, 13 assists a year ago. He's the Quakes all-time assist leader now, and he only joined the team back in 2019. So he's just been a consistent performer. Him, even though Jackson Ewell won't be on the pitch in this game because he saw a second yellow, which led to a red in stoppage time, I think during training this week, he'll be there to provide a lot of the mentality going in. And then there's just a lot of experienced players out there on the pitch. So I think that, it's a team that's facing troubles right now, but I think they have the ability to work their way through it. And there are a lot of guys who were on the team back in 2020 during the pandemic shortened season. They had a terrible stretch where I believe in 3 consecutive games, they lost 7-1 to Seattle, 6-0 to Portland, and 5-0 to Colorado. And they ended up coming back from that and making their way into the playoffs. They qualified, before the end of the season, and they beat LAFC at home. And, it was something they were able to come back from. So I think understanding how to manage these emotions is part of their DNA. Like, they've been through tough stretches before. And even last year when they weren't getting wins toward the end of the year, they weren't losing either. Like, they were still able to earn those critical points down the stretch to get into the playoffs. So I think that there might be, they always say like, oh, what's it like facing a desperate team? Well, like, desperate means maybe you don't have anything to lose. That's not where the Earthquakes are. And I also don't think there's any panic. I think it's very much a team that understands that they're getting backed up against the wall a little bit. So they're going to understand that they need to respond. And that to me is a dangerous place for any team that you're facing, because that they are going to be going, they'll be redlining for a lot of the game. And if they can get that momentum via the redlining to go their way, sometimes that can be a lot to go against. But, I think Austin probably is coming in being aware of like, okay, let them overextend themselves, absorb it, and then see if we can, go on a quick counter, things like that. So it'll be interesting in terms of a chess match. But I do think the Earthquakes definitely feel that the pressure is on, but to borrow from the tried and true phrasing, it's like pressure creates diamonds. And it's like at those moments, you see what comes out of a team.
Yeah. I think something that jumped out in my watching of the Houston match was that like ability to absorb pressure. Somehow it seemed like the back line was a little shaky, maybe, as far as like their communication with each other. Is that something that plays out through the rest of the results so far this season?
Yes and no. I think they've had, like, in surrendering goals, that first one, if you watch, it was just kind of a caromed ball. And I think that they had been doing a good job up to that point. But there have been issues with the defense this year. If you look at the Quakes record, even though that game against Seattle, I said there was a soft penalty, they've given up 2 goals at least in every single match. And so right now that is a concern. Obviously, the back line is one of the last lines of defense before it gets to the goalie. So, they tend to take more of the brunt. But the Quakes have had trouble specifically in transition D. When you're a man down, when they were like they were against Houston, I think some of those issues that they maybe have had overall defensively in the first 6 games maybe become a little bit more problematic. But I feel like for the most part, the Earthquakes backline has done a pretty good job at integrating 2 new players in Bruno Wilson and Vitor Costa. Vitor Costa is the new left back, and Bruno Wilson is the new center back. So I think that there has been a learning curve that's been going on. But I think that whatever issues there have been that you're seeing in that game against Houston, I think it was more exacerbated by what we saw because they were a man down. They did bring on Tanner Beeson, which gave them a little bit of a different look in the back line. Which
super interesting tweak, by the way, like seeing Tanner play out on the wing or playing out on the, like, that left back position. And
well, he's done that occasionally. Like, he also did that when he played for the Burlingame Dragons out here, when he was also at Stanford at the same time, when he was coached by Joe Cannon. And like, he has a little bit of that left back experience. So it's definitely in his arsenal. But yeah, it was it was just a different look, I think, for lack of a better term. And you have to figure out how you're going to deal with that, which becomes that much more difficult when you are down a man.
For sure. One of the things that the national pundit tree is kind of going around is like Lucci's system and deciding the structure of the team and like how the team builds in possession. Something that I think Steph and I noticed in the Houston match, the first 35 minutes anyway, right? Where that what we think of as traditional physical play from San Jose. We think of San Jose as being a very physically tough team. Whether that's true all the time or only when they're playing Austin, I'm not sure. But there's definitely bite to them when they come here or when we go there. And then they seem to be attempting to play more direct against Houston. Is that like a standard play style for them, or was that a way to cut out that super strong Houston midfield?
I think that if they're capable of doing both. And I think Lucci's still trying to figure out what they are this year, because I think you can always get into trouble saying, because this worked a year ago, we can do it the same way now. But it's like, there's changes along the back line. There's changes in the midfield, and you try to figure it out in the process. I think the Earthquakes are capable of playing out of the back and playing, more direct and maybe going a little bit more route one. But right now, I think it has been a little bit different from game to game for the San Jose Earthquakes. We've seen different starting lineups. I mean, last year, I think Jeremy Abobasi started every game, at the tip of the spear as the number 9. And this year that hasn't been the case. We've already seen Preston Judd slide in there as the starter. And we've seen, different starters on the wings, where last year it was usually Cade Cowell, unless it was, him being away with the national team or the youth national team. And this year we've seen Benji Gakanovich and Amal Pellegrino out on the left wing. And Pellegrino is still a question mark. He's the, European that comes over as a, top striker, golden boot winner over there. But he's been injured for the last couple of games. So that's, had questions as well. So there's been more change up this year, injury or otherwise, just to try and figure it out. So I think the one thing we can point to with Lucci and his structure is a quote he had after the LA game, where he said that he maybe gave them too much to think about going into the game. And it may have been a reason why they did not perform as well as he would have hoped. And so I think right now he's not necessarily trying to simplify things, but he's trying to whittle down to what the team does best. And I think that sometimes it can take, up to 10 games. It can take a little bit longer. Last year, I think there was a better idea of what they were going into the season. Whereas this year, because some of the acquisitions came in late, Vitor Costa, the left back I mentioned, Bruno Wilson, the center back, Amal Pellegrino, they came in later. So I think the integration has led to maybe some more questions for Lucci to figure out.
Yeah, so I guess from your perspective, you've mentioned a lot of key players, some of whom are in, some of whom are going to be out this week. Who are the most valuable players to put up against Austin this weekend?
I mean, if you're going to look at who you need to stop, I would say first and foremost, it is Christian Espinosa, the right winger for the Earthquakes, because he's dynamite. When he's in
so
form,
he's so good.
He's so fun to watch because when he came in 2019, it was like we saw him in training and we're like, okay, when is this going to work its way out? And then we went to New York to face the Red Bulls in the third game of the season. And the first half was just like dominated by Espinosa, and the Quakes didn't lose that game. They actually lost their first 4 that year in what was year 1 of Matias Almeida. But out of that game, I was like, oh, that's the Christian Espinosa that we saw in training. Like, he's figuring it out. And since that point, he's been dynamite. So he's key number one. Jeremy Abobasi has a history of scoring goals against Austin. He's got, I think, 1 with Portland and then 3 with San Jose. So he's one to watch.
Yeah, it's funny. We were listening to, you had Lincoln Rose on your show this week, and he was saying we might as well try to get them to take Preston Judd's red card away so that he's starting instead of Abobasi. And I just thought that was such like a good call out. But
yeah, my note here is just Jeremy Abobasi kills Austin.
Yeah.
No, I think it's weird. Some guys like have those teams that they just go off against, and it can be like with Abobasi, it's with a different team. It's not like it's the same situation.
Yeah, it doesn't matter who.
It's him.
Yeah. And he gets it done. So those 2 offensively, and then Will Yarborough, the Quakes keeper right now, who was signed in the offseason because who had been the backup, JT Marcinkowski, blew out his knee at the end of last year in a friendly. And so Daniel was already the starter and then started this year as quote unquote the starter. And then he hurt his hamstring in training. He's out 4 to 6 months, needed surgery. So Will Yarborough was signed in the offseason. He stepped in. He's actually been really good. He was named, it's funny, you give up 2 goals on the road against Houston, and he was named to MLS Team of the Match Day. Like, that tells you how good he was. He stood on his head. He was magnificent. So that would be, one to watch in terms of highlights. So, those 3, and then another one to watch, I think, is Nico Chikuris, the 18-year-old homegrown attacking midfielder. His heads-up play, first touch away from pressure, just ability to find and lead guys in the attacking third. He's really exciting to watch. And for an 18-year-old, his composure and his vision is way ahead of the curve. Like, he's not a blow you away with speed and power type guy, but his mentals out there on the pitch, it's like he's a 25-year-old with 10 years of experience. And this is, year 3 for him. And only did he become a consistent player at the end of last year. So those 4 are the ones that I would pay the most attention to.
Yeah, you got to be pretty good to push Owen Wolf to the wing from the center of the park for that youth national team.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, Nico is a special kid you got. I will say I've always got a soft spot in my heart for JT Marcinkowski because in the Austin FC home opener, the first ever match at Q2 Stadium, after the match, JT turned around and clapped the supporter section because of how just intense they were for that whole 90 minutes. And so anyone from an opposing team who can appreciate what those psychos are doing in the South End there, always is going to earn a special place in my heart. So hope he recovers soon.
Yeah, he's such a nice dude. Like, that's the thing, is like, you root for everybody. Like, I've been working for the Earthquakes. This is my 11th season. And like, you root for everyone. You want everybody to succeed. But I think there was something specifically about when JT went down with that injury where everybody really felt it. And it was like, oh, like that was, I won't say like devastating because, injuries are a part of sports, but there was a different kind of emotional aspect for everybody on the team. And I think in the front office and all of us, that work with the team, just because he is such a good dude.
Which says a lot if he's the backup and that's the reaction, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've gone through kind of the players that are going to be key to San Jose. What generally do you see as the Quakes' path to success against Austin? Right. We over here have been desperately hungry for that first dub that we got last week, and so the vibes have been a little bit hesitant in the fan base, and so seeing us start to turn this corner here, we're looking at an injury depleted and red card depleted San Jose team and thinking, could this be the start of something? What do you think San Jose needs to come in and do to stop that from to stop our joy?
Yeah. I think that ultimately, if the Earthquakes offense is working, then you will see Christian Espinosa getting in behind, playing balls across, working the cutback. If Austin's having trouble with Christian Espinosa, then that would definitely lead me to believe that the Earthquakes are going to pull away with a draw or a win potentially. They haven't won yet on the road. They've only got one win on the year. And I want to get back to the storyline of Austin's quote unquote struggles. But I think if you see things working very well for the Earthquakes with Christian Espinosa getting up on the wing and whoever it's going to be for the Earthquakes on the left wing, when Luchi Gonzalez spoke to the media yesterday, he said that Amal Pellegrino, the left winger, was still, they were uncertain of his status. He might be on the bench. He's training, but we don't know if he's going to be available. I would say if the Earthquakes are working well on the wings, if the ball is making its way from the central midfield out to the wings, that will be indicative of the Earthquakes having success. If they get kind of bogged down trying to work too much over the top, I think that's not a good sign. It depends on, like I've seen it a couple times with teams against Luchi's tactics where they will kind of sit in a mid block and dare the Quakes to go over the top. Because the Quakes have the speed to do it, but you've got to be perfect in that pass where you're spraying from the midfield or going long from the keeper. Otherwise, you're just giving it right back. You've just sprinted down the field. Now you've got to come back and defend. So if the Earthquakes are working one way or another, especially from, a nice build up to get the ball on the wings, that to me is what you want to see specifically, is they have the keeper who can stand on his head and do, perform at a very high level. But I think if you're seeing attacks consistently come from the wings, that's going to be bad news for Austin. And it's crazy because like this Austin rivalry, I think it's 3 straight draws off the top of my head. And the last one was a big Earthquakes win. Austin's never beat San Jose, so they're due. Yeah. And I think that, that's, again, and to get back to that storyline where I keep on hearing people say Austin's not good. And I'm like, I don't buy that because they have a win now. And before that, they had 3 draws already. Against so it's like
crazy good teams too.
Yeah. I always say, like, if a team's getting decisions early on and maybe they're not performing at their highest level, that means that there's a lot of fight there. And so, don't be surprised when the narrative changes. And like, the thing about Major League Soccer is like, we look at the table and we're like, oh, like San Jose is, in 13th right now. Seattle, they're at the bottom. And it's like, no, like
that doesn't
3
matter.
games and things can change wildly, just absolutely wildly. Like it's such a thing in flux, yet we treat every match day finish like, well, that's the end of the year. This team lost. So clearly, everyone's fired and everything's over and done with. It's like, no, that's not how this works. So for Austin to have those points and get their win, it's like, I don't know, they may have had some tough decisions. And like I said, from San Jose's perspective, it's worse far away than when you're up close. So when you see the up close things, you're like, I don't know, there might be something here to build on. And obviously my prep into Austin is, just, you look at it and you start seeing it like, because from before it was like, I kept on hearing that, but then when you look at the results and you're thinking to yourself, actually, I don't like everything that I see here. Like, I think there are problems being presented that people aren't giving them credit for. And let's see what happens to the table in, May and June and July and August. Cause that's, the start does not define a whole lot. And I would point no further than Kansas City last year, who just decided, the first third of the season, whatever. And they won their first game in May and they made a deep run into the playoffs. Cause they were like, I'm always on social media and Reddit and people were like, Peter Vermes has got to go. Like, yeah, I don't know, guys. Like,
yeah, that's
that guy is a legend. Like he'll figure it out. And lo and behold, he figured it out.
Yeah, he's pretty good. If we had a history of, 15 out of 16 playoff appearances, I would be pumping the brakes on that conversation, right? Like, but I think on our end, right, the off-season narrative around Austin, coming into the season with, 18 roster spots filled out of 30 or whatever, before, like we've got currently 7 open roster spots on the team.
Yeah.
And so we haven't been able to fill a full bench even for some of our matches. And I think that frustration is starting to kind of affect the fan base expectations. Additionally, the fact that we got our first win of the season just recently, right? And had seen wins, games that felt like a win until the last second where we got punched into a draw, right? Emotionally, that may as well be a loss for the fan base.
Right.
Obviously, the players and like statistically and in the standings, that's a point. It doesn't matter. But I think that's what drives a lot of that emotional reaction, right? Is like, it could have been 3 points and instead it's 1. And so.
Yeah, I mean, listen, fans want to win. I mean, I always, it's funny to hear like I was just saying about the fan base in Sporting Kansas City. It's like they were upset. Well, like, is that valid? Like, sure, they were losing. If you don't go into May without a league win, I understand why people are upset. But it's why I always go back to it's a long year. Like, it is a long season. Things change. I mean, we go back to, I don't want to say the previous generation because that could get us into the longer, like MLS 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. But like, if you go back to 2015 and 2016 when Portland and Seattle won their MLS Cups, like they both made big charges up the table late in the year. And I feel like only in recent memory are we talking more about the front runners, like where you had LAFC at the top of the table for the entirety of the season recently when they won in 2022. And, you just kind of get into these different narratives. And even last year, FC Cincinnati, they didn't win at all. It was another team from the Midwest that got it done. But everybody was talking about, FC Cincinnati's, incredible season. Before that, it was New England's incredible season. And it's like, the placing on the table doesn't indicate where things are going to be when all is said and done. And it just, there is a lack of patience. Like that's what I always come down to. It's like when you don't win, like, yeah, you wonder where it's going to come from, but it does. Like teams change, they make acquisitions. The whole dynamic of a team can change with one game. And I know that that's probably what Austin's hoping for after the win last weekend, which is not what San Jose fans are hoping for, but San Jose is hoping that, the win followed by the maybe, I won't say self-destructive, but like own worst enemy and getting a red card. Like they're probably saying, okay, is this the turning point where they say, we can't make these mistakes anymore and we have to turn our season around. So it's, from those viewpoints, it does lend a very interesting dynamic as to what we're going to see on the pitch on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm desperate to know from your perspective. Mike brought it up a little bit earlier, but from our perspective, San Jose, they're always our spiciest match of the season. Is this something, it feels to us in Austin like this naturally evolving rivalry? Is San Jose just like a physical team that's gonna, be super chippy with every team? Or is that something that like specifically with Austin, y'all feel as well?
I think they do get chippy with everybody. Like San Jose.
We're not special?
Well, no, but San Jose, I will put it this way. They, in my time, even when I was watching them before I worked for the team, they don't want to make it easy for anyone to play against them. There's a blue collar mentality. It's going to hurt when you're done playing San Jose. But yeah, that chippiness against Austin, and I've talked about this with Lincoln Rose in years past, there is something there because it feels like a rivalry that needs a playoff matchup to really take off, because it does feel like when these two teams go against each other, and we're talking about a lot of draws as of late, and just all, ever since the two teams started playing each other, it has felt like there is the start of that rivalry that needs the spark to really set it off. Which I would love to see these teams play in a 3-game playoff series, which I think would be, very, very fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it does feel a little bit more so against Austin. Like actually Austin and Sporting Kansas City are the two where it feels like there is a lot of that chippiness. And San Jose does have the playoff history. Their last 2 playoff appearances went penalties against Sporting Kansas City, which they lost. But I think that adds to it. And so if you get that playoff, kind of showdown between these two teams, that would lead to more people acknowledging the rivalry, because it does feel like there is a lot of physical play, a lot of chippiness, a lot of spark out there on the pitch. And I look forward to these games because I do feel like there is a something building between the two sides.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, go ahead. I was just going to say, I think Julio Cascante and Brad Stuver are our gentlest players, like just across the board. They are two of our most wholesome boys, right? And to watch Julio roll someone off the pitch and to watch Brad get in someone's face, like there was a level, and I think that was one of the first matches, if not the first, that we played San Jose. And so like right off the bat, every time we get to see this matchup, especially at home for us, we're like ready for it. We're inviting all of you have to come to the San Jose match because you got to see this.
Yeah, we expect Alex Ring to get in somebody's face, right? To celebrate a tackle that probably should have been a yellow card.
I'm a little bummed that Preston Judd is out, because watching him and watching the way he enjoys
being a bad guy. Yeah.
Dude, the instigator, it's something that I love about sports.
Yeah, you're a hockey guy.
You gotta, yeah, exactly. But like, even like, I always talk about like in any sports, like you want to have somebody who can get under the other team's skin. And like Preston Judd's red card with the elbow, like before VAR, and I'm not trying to just be an apologist for my team, because I don't like this to be taken out of soccer in general, but like before VAR, that doesn't get reviewed. It's a 9 saying, get off of me, you're draped all over me. You've got to be smarter in the modern era because they can go back and review that. And so he's learned that lesson, hopefully. But yeah, like you love, the instigator is something that I think is such a necessary component of sports. You need to have somebody that's going to be able to rile up your team. And I go back to former
Felipe, the best ever. Like, yeah.
Well, it's how it goes. I mean, that's you need somebody who can get in people's faces. There's a great story from the Sharks, who I work for in hockey. Owen Nolan used to play for the Sharks, late 90s, early 2000s, big dude. And Jamie Baker, who played with him at the same time, would say, what would you guys do if you needed to get into a game? You'd say, you would hope the other team would piss him off, because then that would change the entire dynamic. It's like, you need those guys who can be that kind of emotional lightning rod. And sometimes it takes a guy who can get into somebody else's face and make something happen. Like that's what you love, the instigator, because otherwise, like, listen, good sportsmanship, I'm all about, but you do need somebody to be that red A who can be sandpaper out there and kind of shake things up, makes the game more fun.
You're going to love Diego Rubio this weekend.
Yes.
Dude has a long history of being Diego Rubio, and coming to Austin has not changed that at all for him. And so, I think he might be on track to get a yellow and then miss our next match.
Because he had a yellow last weekend. So.
He's averaging about 1 per match. And so he is not a man who will lose some due to good behavior. So, chances are, if this rivalry is what it is to us, to the players, we're going to see one for him, and we'll have to find somebody else to play up front next match.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's how it goes. I mean, I believe in the power of yellows. And actually, we kind of talked about that after the Quakes loss to the LA Galaxy, where Ricky Pooch was just kind of allowed to run free in the midfield. It was like, guys, like if that's happening, maybe in the next game, like give him a hip check early. Maybe somebody takes a yellow to just say, hey, we're not going to let you do this again. Like that's, like that mentality has to exist. And it's a little bit more damaging, than in other sports where, like in the NFL, you'll get a flag. It's not the same. You don't get one more flag and you're ejected. It's like, no, you got to make sure if you're going to do that, but it's like, put a hard foul on a guy. Just let him know, like, no, you can't do this. And it makes things more spicy.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a very San Jose mentality too. So like, I'm really glad to see that aspect of like what we've taken from San Jose is reflected in the local vibe as well. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's the blue collar mentality. Just if you're gonna play against us, you're gonna hurt when you're done if you want to try and win. And I don't mean they're trying to go out there and hurt anybody. Don't get me wrong, but it's like, yeah, it's gonna be a tough physical matchup.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ted, thank you so much for taking the time to have this chat with us. I am really excited for this weekend. Like I said, it's one of my favorites of the season always. So thank you for giving us a little bit more insight and a little bit of your San Jose perspective. Where can people find and follow and listen to all the great things that you're doing?
You can find me on Twitter at Ted Ramey Media and on Instagram, just Ted Ramey. Just look for the guy doing that. That's my profile pic. Bald guy with a mic and a red beard. And then you can listen to the Soccer Hour on 810 The Spread, which comes out weekly. It's a San Jose Earthquakes focused podcast, but we also discuss various other issues around the league and the United States men's and women's national teams. And then, you can also, if you're a hockey fan, I work for the Sharks as well, and you can search Morning Tide as the flagship podcast I do for them, so you can check it out. But I would just say follow me on social, and you'll probably get a taste of everything. And that might be as much Ted as you can handle in your life. But thank you so much for having me on, guys. This has been awesome. Don't hesitate to reach out to me whenever y'all need. And I feel like you're going to think that I am mocking you because I am a proponent of the word y'all. I've been using it since I have been like 16 years old because I just think it makes sense as a language construct. And I've heard both you guys say it. I'm like, I hope they don't think I'm mocking them because it is a word that I use.
I honestly didn't even pick up on it. It's so like natural in my language now that.
Yeah. Both of us originally from Massachusetts adopted y'all as a like
pretty fast down here.
Yeah. Like
I don't understand why it's seen as like a Southern or Texas expression. It works so everywhere. Well within the English language.
It's perfect. And like we say down here, y'all means all, right? And that's why we use it, is to be as inclusive as possible for everyone that might be listening, right?
Love it.
Ted, thank you so much. This was awesome. Austin listeners, I highly recommend you check out this week's preview. We will link it in the show notes that Ted did for even more in-depth coverage. He had on Warren Barton from the MLS media. Basically will be Mark Followill's co-announcer on this weekend's call. So if you need more of that local versus national perspective, I think Ted's preview is fantastic. Also, you get to hear our radio coverage, Lincoln Rose, doing Lincoln Rose things. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And we'll talk to you next time.
Anytime, guys.